Mic's good? Yep. Camera, good. Mic, okay. Okay guys, we're good? Okay. Hi, I'm Brett McLean. This summer I decided to take an education class online about curriculum and pedagogy. And at the beginning of the course, I really had a pretty simple understanding of curriculum. I mostly saw it as like documents that the teachers would read and therefore enact, like copy and paste. I knew it was what they had to teach, the outcomes that they would want, um, indicators, content, assignments, and assessments. But throughout this course, that understanding changed. I now see curriculum as more than just a document. It includes what to teach and how students experience learning, whose knowledge is represented, and what gets left out, and the decisions you have to make, or I'm gonna have to make as a teacher. So you're wondering, how did this change come about? Well, for me, I think it was the history of curriculum, along with learning about the theorists. Smith and Skiro were two of the biggest influences of this change. Smith's orientations helped me see curriculum as syllabus, product, process, and praxis, while Skiro introduced different purposes for education, including scholar academic, social efficiency, learner-centered, and social reconstruction. And looking back at my own schooling, I experienced the product and the social efficiency approaches. There was an emphasis on memorization, tests, how we were going to be graded, and those approaches weren't necessarily bad, but this course made me realize that they weren't the only way students learn. Students learn through experience, hands-on, and constant building. The learning theories also changed how I think about pedagogy. Behavioralism is only really observable in the classroom. However, when a teacher is focusing on behavioralism, this really dumbs down their teaching to a one-size-fits-all sort of method. However, constructivism is what I really like. Constructivism says that students aren't blank slates of knowledge just entering the classroom. They're actually bringing their previous knowledge from outside the classroom and what they've learned elsewhere, and they're just building on top of that. And with that previous knowledge, they build more. For instance, I know how to play the piano. Did you know that? Okay. I do not know how to play the piano, but you shouldn't assume. I don't think this means that I would reject traditional views of teaching completely, but instead I would want to recognize that there's different approaches that help students learn differently, but overall I want my students to be active participants rather than passive receivers of information. I don't want to just spew knowledge and hope that they maybe catch it. I want to see them actively learning and participating, enjoying the learning process. So, when I'm in my classroom, hopefully in the future, reading over the Saskatchewan curriculum, I'm not going to treat it like a script necessarily. I think we learned that indicators are not a checklist. So I think that I'm going to treat it as if it's a guideline and I have freedom within it to adapt it to my classroom and my students' needs. Backwards design, which we learned, is a big influence on the way I'd want to teach, because it's not, hey, what am I going to teach tomorrow? It's more, what do I want my students to come away with? What do I want them to learn? And what activities can I use? How can I work backwards, make those activities so that we get to that achievement? I especially like the backwards design because it makes the teacher the facilitator and the student the active participant. And by being the active participant, they're learning, and I can see that learning process develop. Schwab's commonplace theory also taught me my role in curriculum and how I have to account for the learner, the teacher, the milieu, and the subject matter. This basically means that I can't focus on the subject matter or what I want as a teacher, the outcomes to be, when I'm not considering the student themselves or the environment in which they're being brought up in. For example, if I'm teaching at a school where students have lesser advantages than I did, lesser privilege, and maybe they're coming to school hungry or with a lack of sleep from the night before. I have to recognize this as a barrier to their learning and adapt the lessons to what they can handle and the best way they're going to learn. In terms of Banks' theory, he introduces concepts like surface level multiculturalism, where we have hero holidays, or we're just implementing books for the kids to read about diversity or about certain ethnic groups. I would want to go beyond this to the transformative level, which Banks talks about, in which we're introducing those teachings, whether they're indigenous or from another culture, into the actual curriculum itself. So the curriculum itself becomes less Eurocentric and actually involves lots of perspectives for every student from many different backgrounds. Going off of what he said, it really brings up one of the more uncomfortable things I learned in this course, that traditional schooling worked fairly well for me. I was comfortable with tests, grades, memorization, and the following instructions. Because I was successful within that system, it was easy for me to assume that it was simply what a good education looked like. Kamashiro's ideas of common sense challenged that assumption. It made me think about the idea of the good student. If we automatically define a good student as someone who sits quietly, follows direction, and gets good grades, what happens to students that don't fit the description? I also started thinking much more about the hidden and the null curriculum, especially what students don't learn. Something working for me won't always work for everyone, and that needs to be addressed. I know that when I'm in a classroom like this one, I'm gonna have different ideas of curriculum and pedagogy, and those ideas are gonna evolve over time. But what I want to take away from this class and what I learned this summer is that I don't want to be focused on just a rudimentary outcome. I want to be focused on students and if they participated, if they actually learned, and basically their own evolution. Because curriculum is what I teach, but students are the ones who experience it. So by focusing on the students, I think I'm doing them the most justice. Anyway, thank you for listening.